real credibility of what an organization it is. Do we have to ask the UN when you see that the Human Rights Commission has been chaired by years by countries? We are not respecting human rights at all. So I'm sorry to tell, I'm not sure that the UN is better than what we are doing. I'm not sure. I would prefer, when I will retire, I will probably be more independent, to have more time. It's time for you now, I guess. But I agree, it's not easy, it's difficult, it's sometimes frustrating. But for me, it's still a willingness to push, to act piece by piece to go to where we have to go.
I check the schedule because today I have the FIFA thing, and I get back to you, and then we sit down in a corner and to have.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
I will. It will be my pleasure.
Yeah. So, Mr. Herman? Du bist so fies.
Hvis du står der, og jeg står her. Og vi kan se der. Er det ikke fint?
Måske omvendt, du står på talerstolen, så står jeg ved siden af, at du skal sige mest.
Men så bytter vi bare lige rundt. Så du starter der. Ja, men... Speakers. Okay. Good morning. How are you doing? Should I get started?
Well, I'm ready.
This is me.
Ladies and gentlemen, please have a seat. If you want to participate in this session, will you speak from up here? You prefer that? Okay, that's fine. Just
When I get my presentation.
okay.
That is when the clock starts.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm pleased to see that so many chose to stay in this room, although I know there are many other interesting presentations going on. We now have a session that is planned to end at 1 o'clock, where we have lunch. So the time is a little bit tight, but I think this is a very interesting topic. My name is Michael Ask. I'm the moderator, as you can see, on this session. And the headline for this session is The Battle for Integrity in Sport, Governments versus Sports Organizations. I think many sports fans nowadays are of the opinion that the credibility of the governing bodies of sport perhaps have never been on a lower stage than now. This statement might be true, it might not be true. But anyway, I think it's very interesting to have a debate on how come we reach this stage, whether it's true or not. And that raises the question that was also touched upon yesterday, the relationships between governments and sports confederations. How should that relationship be? And have they failed until now in creating the integrity we would like to see in sports? We will also touch upon the subjects of anti-doping and match fixing, how we combat these phenomena. Are we doing it in the best and most intelligent way? So let me start this session by introducing the first speaker, which is for me a great pleasure to introduce my good colleague, the CEO of Anti-Doping Authority of the Netherlands, Herman. Herman has held this position for almost 10 years, and he has a special interest and a huge knowledge about legal, ethical, and managerial aspects of anti-doping policies. And I think that's also reflected in the title of his presentation, Stuck in the Mud or Moving Fast Forward. And I will please ask Herman and also the other speakers to restrain themselves to 15. I can live for 17 minutes, but please. I know that's tough, but that's life sometimes.
Okay. Well, I was counting for 20 minutes, so I have a problem now, but we'll see how far I get. 17 minutes for the status globally of anti-doping is tight. This is my presentation. I'll be quick about it. Let's start with the rules. Where are we after basically only 15 years of a global anti-doping policy and only 11 years of the World Anti-Doping Code? Well, we have a lot of rules. Of course, there's the code. That's the central document. It's about 150 pages. And below it are 5 international standards, including the prohibited list and 4 other international standards. They're all obligatory. We all have to follow these rules. And below that, there are numerous model rules and guidelines. Altogether, really a lot of pages. Actually, I counted them. We have 1,260 pages of rules in place at this very moment, which is quite a lot. And generally speaking, these are good, strong rules. They have been there for some time now. They have been amended. They have been renewed. But generally speaking, they are really legally sound. So the production is impressive. And if you want to move forward in anti-doping, we don't need more rules, is my opinion. What we should talk about is implementation. Let's start with countries. There is, of course, the Anti-Doping Convention of the Council of Europe, which is the oldest one. The funny thing is, the Council of Europe has 47 member states, and this convention has 52 parties, which means that outside the country, the Council of Europe, 5 states actually entered the convention. There's the UNESCO Convention, and of the 195 UNESCO members, 182 have signed or otherwise participated in the convention. There are critics who say, well, still 13 countries to go. Well, those are only a few islands and the Vatican City. So basically, the world actually has decided to follow the rules on paper, of course. And this is impressive. This is a record. And it's really needed to go forward. So we must be very happy about it. But because everyone is bound by it, because it's not a matter of another signature, but it's about really going on. The question is, how does it work? And then you must admit that conventions are weak instruments. I mean, there are instruments between countries, independent states, who decide to sign a document, but who do not have the instruments that are necessary to actually enforce the rules. So I'm not criticizing the convention. I'm just stating that it is a limited tool to actually achieve what you want to achieve. It would be actually naive to expect that in 182 countries in the world there's a strong anti-doping program. People in Syria, in Palestine, in Haiti really have other troubles to worry about than anti-doping, I can assure you. Read the papers. So in most cases, countries where the things are not really in order, like they should be, are also countries where it is not of a big influence to the global sport community, thank God. But in some cases, and of course you know the examples, there are countries where there really is a problem, and those problems usually are brought about by journalists. The factor of journalism in anti-doping is very, very important. One of the countries being, of course, Russia, and we're all looking forward to have a report on the situation in Russia. I don't know what's coming out of it. But of course, these are countries with a problem, and journalism really is needed to get these things out in the open, which doesn't solve the problem, but at least makes it clear where we are. Let's go to the anti-doping organizations. And I start with NADO's. And of course, I'm not neutral. I'm the director of a NADO. Currently, there are about 50 NADO's which you could say are true NADO's, in the sense that they implement all the rules and they basically do all the stuff that has to be done by NADO's. 50 in almost 200 countries. So about a quarter of the countries in the world has a true NADO. Most of them have quality certification. They're different kinds. Some are close to government, some are close to sport. And basically, in most cases, they are really independent in their daily business. I got never any interference, either from government or sport, in the decisions that we make, the people we choose to test, etc., etc. And it's true for most, not all, but most of the NADO's. But independence, one of the issues here, is of course nonsense when you look at finance. NADO's must be funded. And when they're not funded, they can function. I'll get back to that later. But NADO's do actually almost 90% of all the testing worldwide. Almost 90%. They do 90% of the result management. So in 90%, when there is a problem, we have to deal with it. And we can do that, I think, that's my opinion, because we are simply focused organizations. We have got nothing else to do. Nothing else to worry about. If there's no anti-doping, we are not there. So we are about one thing, but we are not strong, basically because our finance is really limited. And in quite a number of cases, we are not legally able or allowed to communicate with law enforcement, to exchange information. And sometimes actually we are under attack in a number of countries by the public opinion. And that makes NADO's weaker than they could be. We cannot do all we should do. And specifically, if you have a really high-level case with a well-earning athlete, most NADO's actually are not able to process legally such a case because it simply costs too much money. There's also a problem between us and the international federations. Us and the international federations, in the sense, those are two worlds, but they are moving closer to each other, and I'm quite optimistic on them, but it is still a problem. Let's look at RADO's, regional anti-doping organizations. Those are the organizations not meant to be. They were not planned. They are a solution for the problem that in 3/4 of the countries in the world there is not a national anti-doping organization. That's why they're there. They fill in the gaps of the original model. And they only appeared in the last version of the World Anti-Doping Code. Before that, they were not in the code. And they play an essential role. It's important that they are there, but essentially they are service providers. They take care of testing. They take care of producing education material. But they're not regulators. And still in the code, in the present code, the 2015 code, there are 2 clauses, 2 articles, which are meant to make sure that somehow they also regulate in the countries where they are, to make sure there's a basic legal ground for the work. Let's wait and see. But I don't think it's really a strong idea. And in reality, like this is Africa, I borrowed it from the WADA side. The whole of Africa has only very few national anti-doping organizations and is actually covered only by regional anti-doping organizations which are not regulators. That's our reality nowadays. Let's go to international federations, the third group. Let's say it's mixed. They all have the rules, basically. A few small exceptions, but all Olympic federations surely make sure that they implement the World Anti-Doping Code. And they do about 10% of the testing in the world. But the variation is enormous. In many cases, the whole anti-doping unit of an international federation consists of one person, part-time. That's the reality. They are bigger, thank God, but all in all, it's a very complicated thing to talk about the international federations because the differences are huge. Some of them really run good programs, strong programs. And if there are problems, they usually are not actually at the coal pit on the working level. Because again, those people are actually dedicated people. If there are problems, they sure can be on any level in the organization, and sometimes there are. And again, it's the mirror. International federations and NADOs are not always on the same floor. Could international federations do things better? Yeah, for instance, quality certification would be a thing. But let's talk about independence. And after I had actually written this presentation, the news came out that the IOC had decided to try to make the testing worldwide independent from sport, from the international federations and also from the IOC. I think that's a revolution. I did not expect to see that in my lifetime, actually. And all of a sudden it was there. Of course, we have to wait and see how it will really work out, but it's a huge step. And it was not covered very big in the news. In the Netherlands, it took 5 lines or something, and that was all the journalists had to say about it. And I think it's talking about revolution or evolution. This is revolution, I think. But of course, also there, finance is what really makes what you can or cannot do. Let's go to resources. There is this idea about this huge anti-doping monster industry. Worldwide, there are about 2,000 and 2,500 people working in anti-doping. That's all anti-doping organizations combined, international federations, WADOs, NADOs, WADA, and all the laboratories. The city where we're right now has more than 10 times that amount of people to run a city. So what we actually have is the number of people you need to run a really small city or a big village. That's what we're talking about. That's reality. It is hard to have an exact number because there's no central database or whatever. So I went to a lot of websites to look it up. Could be wrong a bit, but it's something like that. We are a small community, a small crowd. Financial, I always said a few times, finances. At this moment, my estimate, $300 million is spent on testing worldwide. That includes the passport program and things linked to that. Lance Armstrong, one athlete, earned half of that, one man. And the city of Aarhus has 10 times as much as this amount of money. And there's another like 50 million spent on education. That's it. That's what the world is actually spending on anti-doping. That's what it's worth. No more, no less. And you could hope it would be more, or you could maybe not hope it would be more, but this is reality. Effectiveness. Do we catch the cheats? Well, my estimate would be that it would be about 1,700, maybe 1,800 athletes who are sanctioned every year because of intentional anti-doping violations. Less than 1% of the doping test turns out this kind of proof for an anti-doping rule violation. And in-competition testing, which is a very interesting thing, is more effective than out-of-competition testing. And it has been that for years and years. So do we catch cheats? Yeah, we catch 1,750 cheats, or something like that. And a few dozen athlete support personnel, only a few dozen. A lot of cheats get away with it, there is no doubt. More important, the idea is that many athletes get away with it. And that's the idea with quite a number of athletes as well. And you won't help this by implementing new rules or new technologies. That really won't solve this problem. One of our problems actually is how many athletes do actually use doping. There's too little research on it, but there was research done in Germany in 2007 among the highest level world championships, track and field. And then the estimated was between 20 and 39% deliberately had used doping at one point in time. In the junior elite, I think it was up to 18 years or so, It even was still 3-11. We did it this year, more or less the same approach. Our best estimate in the Netherlands is that 4.2% of elite athletes in the Netherlands use doping, which is about half of those in gyms and sports schools. About the double, 8.2% of them use doping. So there's a gap, there's a big gap between what we actually can prove and what is at the same time going on. But we know too little, more research should be done. Do we catch the innocent? It's in Dutch, but this is a doping user who says, but I don't understand how I got here. What happened? I didn't intend to get here. My estimate would be that we have about 750 athletes every year who did not intend to break the rules. They are not cheaters, but they did have something in their body which should not be there. And that's a problem. In my own country, about 50% of all cases, the athlete says, I did not want to break the rules. Explain me what happened. Help me. And this is very important. I think it's one of my standard themes for our job, because if we catch too many innocent, and it's not innocent in the sense that they didn't make a mistake, they surely made a mistake. They broke the rules. They should have done better. But these cases are different from the intentional ones. In the new code, that is accepted. There is a different approach, also in terms of the sanction, between intentional and non-intentional violations. And they can be a result of all kinds of things, stupidity or sloppiness. And stupidity is not an anti-doping rule violation. But the consequence can be an anti-doping rule violation. So we have to deal with unintentional cases, and we have to deal with them very, very carefully, because they are athletes who earn it, and also because the credibility of our job has got to do with this problem. And thank God, in reality, when the rules give room for individual assessment of these cases, the panels, the disciplinary panels, use that room. I took, in this case, it's methylhexanamine, which is often in food supplements, unintentional, it's not on the label, and you see that the whole range actually is used. The same goes for cannabis. I always have to talk about cannabis for some reason. The same goes, cannabis is an issue where you can choose the sanctions, and panels really choose the whole range and go to the individual athlete. Do we deter? A very important question, and usually it's completely forgotten. Do we deter? Yes, probably, to a certain extent, yes, but can we actually say a lot about it? Not too much. There has been research done into the effectiveness in terms of, can we see that the actually athletic results, the sport performance, is influenced by the introduction of anti-doping measures? What happens when we introduce out-of-competition testing? And then it has shown very clearly, yes, there is an effect. Straight after introducing, for instance, out-of-competition testing, you can see it in the results of the sport. So it helps. Another example is EPO. EPO actually was in the system, and the performances dropped once the first and later on the second generation test for EPO was introduced. But this kind of research is rare. There should be much more, much more. In our own practice, we talked during our cycling investigations with a lot of cyclists and athlete support personnel, and actually became more or less to the picture that there are three groups. There is a group who can actually be deterred, who just say, I don't want to live like that. I don't want to look over my shoulder every day. It's not my cup of tea. There is a group which just tries to avoid what we do, and there is a group which actually says, I'll use anyway. I'll use anyway. They cannot be deterred. But the general picture is, we know too little about the deterrence of anti-doping measures. We know it works. We know it does. We don't know how often. We don't know with which athletes it actually works. I come to my conclusions. I think I'm still in time, yes? Good. I'll do my best. So, you have an impressive set of rules. And this is a compliment to the lawyers who made them. We don't need more. We have a lot of countries who have signed the conventions. Great, we don't need more. We go for implementation. How we make sure that this really works. And we live now in interesting times. And it has been an issue all over the time, all over this conference up till now, and probably the coming days as well. So a large number of countries are committed, but a small crowd is actually trying to make it work, really a small crowd. Anti-doping organizations are small. We are not the big monsters. I'm a bit above average. Presently, I have 18 people in my office, which is about 14 full-time equivalents, including myself. And whether or not we do a good job is dependent on money, on our legal position, and the political support. And that is changing from time to time. It's different from country to country. Don't think there are no problems at all. And because I think that actually there will not be much more money in the system. Maybe the contrary. Yesterday it came out that UCAT, the United Kingdom anti-doping organization, will lose 25% of its budget, or may lose 25% of its budget. So let's be optimistic and say we keep this amount of money going. Then there's only one way to go, to find cheaper ways to do the job. We can't go on like this. We have to find cheaper, inexpensive testing methods. And we need better statistics to show what we are actually doing, to know what's working. We need more research into the effectivity of what we do. We have to show what we are there for. And if it doesn't work, we have to do something else. Because the problem is much, much more too important, I think, to leave it alone. We have to know how much athletes are actually using and what they're using. And are we influencing that or not? And of course, I already said that we have to know much, much more about deterrence. And that may come from other walks of life than anti-doping. So, a lot has been achieved, but still, a whole lot still must be done. But we should be realistic. The size of the problem is huge. And the resources we have to do something about it are quite limited. There's no such thing as completely clean sport. Don't believe it. I don't believe it, and I don't think you should believe it. But we'll try. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Herman, for this very interesting presentation. I think that it raised a lot of interesting questions, and I'm sure that the audience will take the opportunity to ask you some questions afterwards. So thank you very much for that. And I was impressed that you had 52 slides in 17 minutes. I think that's a new world record, maybe.
Thank you.
So the next speaker is a great honor for me to introduce Mr. Dick Pound. I could spend 15 minutes listing up your merits, but that will not be fair to you because then I would have taken all your speaking time. But I think we all know who you are, and we all know that you are very busy at the moment chairing this independent commission that we also spoke a little bit about yesterday. So that you took the time to come here to Aarhus is really an honor, I think, for everyone, also the organizers. So please, Mr. Pound, the floor is yours, and I think you're going to talk about the relationships between governments and sports organizations, I hope.
Well, thank you very much. Nice to be here again, and I thought Herman gave a very good snapshot of where we are today and some forward projections. I thought it might be interesting for some of us to know how all this happened. You're looking at all of these structures with a code and WADA and conventions and so on. Back in 1998, during the Festina scandal in cycling, that actually was the cause of the creation of WADA, there was nothing of this nature in place. After that Festina scandal, the IOC got together and said, you know, nobody trusts cycling or any other sport to really police the use of doping in the sport. Nobody really trusts any particular country to make sure that its own athletes are clean. And nobody thinks that the IOC is in a position to control the Olympic movement. So we thought about what might happen, and we had a model to some degree in place with the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which is an organization that is not controlled by any particular stakeholder. We said, you know, we could apply something like that and create an independent, international, because the problem was international, anti-doping agency. And we thought that sounded like a good idea, so we said, all right, let's put some organograms in place and see what it looks like. and we'll have a convention, or a world conference rather, in Lausanne in February of 1999, about 4 months later. For my sins, I was assigned the job of figuring out who should be the stakeholders and putting together an organogram. And I had a terrific idea, self-confessed. I had 6 blocks, equal blocks of control. The IOC, international sports federations, national Olympic committees, Olympic athletes, since they were very much involved, and a 6th one that would have included governments, somebody from the pharma industry. Actually, I had a separate block for government, and then the miscellaneous one was an major event organizer, somebody from the pharma industry, and I think somebody from the coaching profession. So we're all set. We're going into our conference in February in Lausanne, but it turns out that we're in the middle of the Salt Lake City crisis. And I remember the IOC president at the time says, "Listen, Deke, maybe we should put this off for a while." And I said, no, look, it's too important. We can't be paralyzed by Salt Lake City. Let's do it. And we got there, and everybody had 15 minutes to speak. And the first 5 minutes were spent telling the IOC why it should never have existed, why it's never done anything right in its whole life, it should disappear, and then they'd get on to the issue. The outcome was that governments at that point said they actually threw it, for governments, a tantrum. They didn't actually lie down on the carpet and kick their heels, but it was pretty close. And they said it was an insult that they were only getting one of the control blocks. That if they didn't have at least 50%, they were going to leave and carry on. So I went and reported all this to Sam Ranch, and he said, yeah, I told you we should never have had this conference. I said, it's a much better idea than mine. If we have 50-50 with governments and sport, a couple of things happen. One is that governments actually will have to do something instead of just criticizing the sports movement. And the other is they can damn well pay half of the costs, which we already knew would be considerable. So he sent me back, and I went in with a bunch of ministers in the room. I said, do you guys really insist on 50%? And they said, absolutely. And we said, you got it. What? I said, you got it. It's a great idea. It's better than ours. I said, there are only 2 things. I said, first, we don't have the luxury of allowing you to proceed at your usual glacial pace in getting something international in place. Here we are in February of 1999. January 1st of 2000, we've got to be in the field. We want to start testing leading up to the games in Sydney. They said, okay, well, we can do that. And to give them credit, by November of that year, we had WADA in place. So the second thing is, if you got 50% of the control, you can pay 50% of the cost. Oh, well, and you've never seen such a war dance done on what was basically $8 million at the time when we started. And the negotiated outcome was, I said, all right, look, we'll do it for the first 2 years while you get organized. But starting in year 3, you have to pay 50% of the costs. And they agreed with that, and again, to their credit, they found a formula for it. So there we were. We have this 50-50 organization, and I can tell you the first meeting or so, and I got stuck because it had been my idea of being the chairman of it. We have this first meeting, and so you've got all these member states looking at cross-country skiers and IF presidents and IOC members like that, and saying, is it possible that this cross-country skier can cancel out the vote of La France? I say, well, that's how votes work. We weren't sure, and then of course the sport movement is looking at these monolithic governments, who've done nothing but, in their view, underfund them and complain about them. But I must say that when our experience was that when we had program aspects to deal with, and you didn't need an election where people actually had to vote, we've done almost all of our major decision making by consensus. People understand what needs to be done, and it was not too difficult to get there. Fast forward a little bit, and you've got 3 things in place that I think are important. First of all, WADA itself is now pretty well established. Secondly, we have the World Anti-Doping Code. And that was an exercise that was quite remarkable in the history of sport. We had 205, give or take, national Olympic committees, 205 countries, 35 Olympic sports, all with different rules, different lists, different processes, different standards, different sanctions. And all that confusion added to the perception of the world that nobody really cared much about this. So we said, all right, we've got to have a single set of rules. Everybody's got to be playing off the same page. And we started a consultation process. If you want to get anything done internationally, consult. You just can't get away without doing it. So we consulted and consulted and consulted and consulted. Finally sent out a first draft. It was actually about our 17th draft, but sent it out and said, all right, you've got 3 months to comment on it. We collected all of the answers, dealt with them, tried to respond where appropriate, made changes where we had good suggestions. Said to others, well, look, if you look at this clause, doesn't that deal with your problem so that it's already been dealt with? And a few you just ignored. And then we sent out a second draft and said you have 2 months to respond to it. And then finally a third draft a month before we called our second World Conference in anti-doping sport here in Denmark, in Copenhagen in 2003. And we had everybody together and we went through the code for the gazillionth time, clause by clause. And then at the end of it, I was chairing the conference, said, all right, are we happy that WADA is now going to adopt this code? And if you go to international meetings, that's how you vote. Eh? So I'm looking out at some of the sports, cycling and football and others, and I can see down the line, they say, well, some people may have applauded, but we didn't. So you put your hands behind your back and you cross your fingers, and I said, is there anyone in this room who does not agree with the code that's about to be approved? And you look at them and finally, most of them blink. I said, fine, then it's unanimous. So off we went. It took about 4 minutes for the WADA Foundation Board to adopt it. We came back and said, all right, now there's a code. But that's only step one. The fact that WADA has a code doesn't mean anything if you're cycling or you're swimming or whatever it is. All of you have to go back and incorporate the code into your own domestic rules. And we agreed that the code would come into force on January 1st, 2004, and that at least for the Olympic sports, they would all adopt the code prior to the opening ceremony of the Athens Olympic Games in 2004. And again, to their credit, the National Olympic Committees, the IFs, and everybody did that in time for the Games. Cycling, the root cause of the whole thing, did it the day before the opening ceremony. I think they wanted to get through the Tour de France under their own steam and no code. But there we were. Governments, of course, say, well, that's easy for you guys, but we're governments. You think there's no institutional testosterone in governments? We can't simply apply a code that hasn't been put together by governments. And they said, well, we'll do it. The Copenhagen Declaration was a statement of political support for this as opposed to legal. And they settled on using UNESCO as the umbrella for a convention, the convention that we're talking about. And they said, we can't do this by the time of the Athens Games, but we should be in a position to do so by the time of Torino in early 2006. And again, to give credit where credit is due, because UNESCO did not have a world-famous reputation for fast action. And its director general knew that. And because we had said, look, we're a little worried. I mean, you're nice guys, but they said, no, I understand the reputation of my organization. I want to use this occasion to show that we can actually act in real time. And so in a period of about 18 months, they went from having nothing and not really understanding the doping. I mean, for drug use for governments was all, cannabis and heroin and that sort of thing. The sport doping issues were largely unknown to them. Anyway, with our help and with a lot of other help, they got this together, and by November of 2005 at the Conference of Parties in Paris, 193 of the member states adopted this convention. They put quite a high threshold on it. 30 countries had to ratify it before it came into force. And that was done, I think, within about 2 months. People were, countries were, we were lucky. We captured everybody's imagination, and they were really motivated to do it. And we put some strings in it that, you know, if you haven't adopted the convention, you can't be a candidate to host the Olympic Games. That was, you know, one of the first uses of muscle by the IOC. And it's not an accident that this is the first UNESCO convention in many, many years that the United States has ratified, because they were running Chicago as their candidate city. The number of countries, as Herman mentioned, that haven't adopted are either minuscule or they're dysfunctional because they've got wars and other things. But I mean, basically, about 99.5% of the people in the world are now covered by this convention. In terms of assessment of where we are, and I must say the idea of governments versus the sports movement in this should be a misnomer. We have to be working together because there are certain things that we can do in sport that governments can't, and vice versa. I mean, we know who the athletes are, we know where they are, we know who the coaches are, we know who the bad actors are, we know more or less where they are. But we can't enter into premises, we can't seize evidence, we can't prevent trafficking or even possession. So you need the sound of two hands clapping to make this system work. My assessment, and as having run WADA for 9 years and then staying on the foundation board ever since, is that especially at the level of governments, they think that good governance is keeping the budget down. Whereas in this particular objective, the idea should be to get the budget up to do the amount of work that we need to do. So that's been a problem. There are a lot of conflicts of interest around the foundation board table, as between governments. Governments all have, you know, when they're sitting there, they're saying country X should be declared code compliant, non-code compliant. They look and they're looking at trade figures, they're looking at political connection. It's very hard to get any action done. The same within the sports movement. Nobody really wants to pull the trigger on anything. So there's been, in my view at least, an unwillingness to get to the accountability level. We have not really declared anybody, any country or any federation, non-code compliant. And all those who think that all international federations or countries are code compliant, please raise your hand, because I have a bridge in Brooklyn that I'd like to try and sell you after this session. And the assessment of compliance, we've been very reluctant to use. I mean, we have a monitoring role provided by the code and accepted by the Olympic movement and by governments through the convention. We've been very reluctant to use that compliance weapon. And I think we have to do that because we've been around, 15 years? We've had a code for coming up to 11 years, and we haven't done anything with it. So people think it doesn't matter. And that's why, you know, I think so far, we may have declared, Fred, you mean it's like French Equatorial Africa, that sports giant, has been declared non-code compliant. Wow, that's got anti-doping by the you-know-whats. We haven't gone after any big countries, and there are some, clearly the big problems are in the bigger, more successful countries. I mean, there's this kind of a triage that you do in these things. There's countries at the top that provide most of the athletes and win most of the medals. That's where your real problem is. Then there's a second level where there is a problem but not that big, and then a whole bunch of these tiny countries where the problem, if it exists, is minor, it's unsophisticated, and so you apply different levels of risk and analysis to those different countries and the different sports. I mean, there's far more likely to be drug use in athletics and swimming and weightlifting and so on, than there might be in archery. Which is not to say, I don't think any sport is drug-free. Let me just finish with the proposal that has come out of an IOC-led meeting that all the testing should be done not by the individual sports or by individual countries, but by a non or an apolitical independent unit, maybe WADA. A lot of questions in that, both in terms of making it work, financing it. How are you going to get the money to do all of the testing that you need to do all of the research that needs to be done? But I think we'll take that on and probably have some questions for the IOC as to what they may have thought they were recommending, and whether or not they're looking at WADA and turning WADA into a kind of a policing organization as well as educational. But an interesting leap in the sense of a recognition that, you know, the inherent conflicts at a national level and within a sport, where you're both promoting and policing, where you're both supporting sport and demanding high performance results, no matter how they're achieved. Those are very serious conflicts, and how do you get rid of those and make that system work? So it's going to remain a work in progress. I think that some of the figures that Herman mentioned as regarding the prevalence of doping are probably on the low side. I think the problem is a lot greater than most people thought it was or even feared it was. I think it's a real problem, and one of the good things coming out of WADA is at least people are now alert to the fact that there is a problem, and they're alert to the fact that there are ways of dealing with it and that there are mechanisms. What we need to get away from, and I don't know whether we go quite as far as Peter was suggesting yesterday, but very good food for thought, is these are not complicated constitutional human rights issues that we're dealing with. We're dealing with cheating in sport. Where it has become more nuanced in today's world is that there's a lot more money in sport than there used to be, and so you've got to factor into the equation not only cheating in sport, where if there were no money involved, you say, look, we don't want to play with you anymore. Take your marbles and go home, and we'll carry on with it. Now, somebody's got big prize money to which he or she may not have been entitled. What do you do about that? And is that one of the things that's accounted for, at least here in Western Europe, increasing criminalization of sport and doping? So we've got some issues to work out, but I do think that we've, system-wise, we've got something in place that works. The code works, the science works, it'll improve, but so on. It's the people that don't want it to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dick, for this very interesting presentation and deep insight in the history of the WADA code and the establishment of WADA. And in many ways, I think a positive presentation regarding that we actually have come a long way down the road, but maybe we are standing at a crossroad now, how to proceed from here, which also fits very good into the presentation Herman gave. So now it's a great pleasure for me here at the end of this session to give the word to two of my employees, Christina Friis Johansen and Jesper Frigast Larsen, who will give a presentation on how you might unify the effort when it comes to combating some of the problems we have within integrity in sports, and in this case, whether it will be a good idea to unify the effort in anti-doping, the anti-doping work and the match fixing. Please.
Thank you. As you see, we're now going to be a team up here. That's not only because I don't like to do these presentations alone, but because we're underlining our conclusion or the point of our presentation here, that a unified approach to especially match fixing and anti-doping is beneficial, and we're going to give you some practical examples from the cold phase of the work with anti-doping and give you some suggestions on how we could use those experiences in another great challenge to the integrity in sports, namely match fixing. I think Herman and Mr. Pound both gave a very good overview of how we've developed the anti-doping work over the past years and where we are today. Our point is, and I might as well just give it away in the beginning, is that we can use those experiences and learnings that we have from anti-doping in the work with match fixing. As I said, we're two up here. My colleague Jesper has experience from the match fixing secretariat under the NOC of Denmark. I have 11 years experience from the cold phase of anti-doping, working with the rules in practice in the office every day, and much of those experiences are relevant for the challenge against match fixing, I think. What we're going to talk about today is both those experiences, as I mentioned, but also we're going to give you some examples of how especially the need to exchange information is important. That's crucial in anti-doping, to exchange information between different organizations involved in the process, but that's also one of the pillars in the fight against match fixing, and we're going to give you some examples on that. And finally, we're going to enlighten you on the Danish model. That is how we in Denmark have structured the work against match fixing and where we are today with the work. Basically, what we're looking at is this puzzle. Two of the greatest challenges against the integrity in sport is, of course, as we know, doping and match fixing, but also other integrity issues could be included in this debate on how we, at the everyday practical work, structure our efforts.
And if we look at this slide, we can see that there are actually differences, a lot of differences, as we also heard Pagaret from the IOC say earlier today, between doping and match fixing and the fight against those two things. Not going into detail, it's obvious that when it comes to doping, we have a much stronger framework. We heard Mr. Pound just explain a moment ago how this whole system was developed with an international, a worldwide convention, the World Anti-Doping Code, the WADA, and coming from that, we have anti-doping regulations in all the federations. We have national anti-doping regulations and national anti-doping organizations in most of the countries, etc., etc. Match fixing is a relatively new problem, at least match fixing as such has existed ever since the ancient Olympic Games in ancient Greece in not prehistoric, but historic times, but as a phenomenon that is afflicting sport, it's relatively new that there is so much emphasis on this, and this reflects in the lack of legal instruments that we see in the field of match fixing. Some international federations have been in the forefront. We know that this is maybe 80% a football problem, so naturally football has been in the forefront of the fight against match fixing, but we also see that this is a phenomenon that is spreading around sports, around countries, and it needs to be addressed. We are happy to see now a European convention. We had it described yesterday also, those of you who were present there. And this Council of Europe convention, it's not limited to Europe. Any country in the world could sign it and ratify it if they so wish. But at the moment, compared to the 182 nations within the UNESCO convention, there's still only 21 who have signed the Council of Europe Convention. Hopefully more will follow. On the national level, we are quite far in Denmark with integrating these regulations. First of all, we are probably still the only country in the world where the National Olympic Committee and Sports Confederation have introduced general regulations covering all sports, which means basically all athletes in this country who are governed by a set of national sports rules. Some of you will have been present 2 years ago when this was explained as brand new rules. But we also now have a law. We have the law on anti-doping, which has changed names to Law on Integrity in Sport in Denmark, and it covers now also prohibition of match fixing in the framework of sports. And I think also to be commended is the Danish government represented here to be in the forefront of national legislation in this regard. Yes. And as I said, unlike the remarks from the IOC representative who stated this morning that in her opinion and in the opinion of IOC, there's a lot of difference between the problem of match fixing and the problem of doping. Well, our opinion is that actually there is a lot in common. We heard even in today's media that it has now been revealed that Lance Armstrong was not only part of a highly sophisticated doping scheme, but he actually also, with his team, Motorola, was buying wins in the bicycle races, which is, of course, match fixing in its purest form, to buy the wins of competition. So it means that we saw an organized scheme where both doping and match fixing was organized within the same framework. This might be a special case, but maybe not that unusual. At least we see that, and you can see the list itself, I'm not going to go into detail, but this is business, this is very big business. As Mr. Ali would be able to tell you, the betting industry is, of course, a multi-billion-dollar industry. Maybe the doping industry in terms of money is not as big, but it's still, we see examples of crime syndicates being behind doping. We see, as we say here, the individual athletes could very often be the small fish, and the difficulty could be to catch the big fish being behind the small fish, who are the end users of this sort of sports crime. Those who are behind, as in all kinds of crime, are the difficult ones to catch. The methods being needed to investigate and to come closer to finding those who are behind what's going on is actually the same. It could be the same kind of investigation that took place. And it's also definite that this is something sport cannot solve alone. Sport simply doesn't have the means, the powers to investigate. This is a matter for law enforcement, for governments to have regulations, to have police, to have cross-border cooperation between law enforcement agencies, police, customs, other agencies to work together, because this is very often international crime syndicates working cross-border, as we see in match fixing, as we see probably also when it comes to at least producing, selling, distributing doping. So we think it's relevant to say that there is a lot in common, and if we try to look at it from that approach, we might come to some of the conclusions that we do. Obviously, there are also differences. What was mentioned earlier today, doping is about overperforming, match fixing is about underperforming. Yes, that's obvious, but in the end, both is about cheating in sport and getting some results, being it sports results or financial gains that you are not basically entitled to. And as mentioned, there is no global instrument like the World Anti-Doping Code when it comes to match fixing. There is no global institution as the World Anti-Doping Agency when it comes to match fixing.
But maybe we'll have that in the future. It's to be seen. So the Danish model, as Jesper mentioned, of course, Denmark ratified the UNESCO Convention. We ratified the Council of Europe convention on match fixing. So far so good. Also, the Danish government decided to place both match fixing and doping within the Ministry of Culture to have a sort of a unified approach also there. The law on doping was recently, as Jesper mentioned, changed to the law against the promotion of integrity in sport. Also a signal that the Danish government and politicians see match fixing and anti-doping have similar characteristics and need to be placed within the same structure in order to combat it most efficiently. And we're very happy with that so far. The Danish NATO, Anti-Doping Denmark, which we represent, have been a public institution, which is also important in this area, because as a public institution, of course, we're obliged to follow the regulation on public insight into documents and files, and that's a crucial element of the fight against, and the protection of course, information and personal data, which relate to both doping and match fixing. That's also crucial. Furthermore, the NOC of Denmark have anti-doping regulations and oblige the sports federation to submit to these unified and common rules under the NOC and Sports Confederation. And in addition to that, the Danish Football Association have supplementary rules as the only national sports federation so far, but that's a possibility for Danish Sports Federation to implement rules in addition to those implemented by the NOC and Sports Confederation. And finally, we work together. As a NATO, we have very strong ties to national federations, obviously, which is really beneficial both in the field of anti-doping, but will also be important in the field of match fixing. As an institution, we are working on a day-to-day basis with federations. It's very easy to talk about anti-doping issues, but also match-fixing issues when they occur. And that's in comparison to what gaming industry and other match-fixing regulatory bodies would have. We are there. We are closely tied to the sport, which we believe is important for also the fight against match-fixing.
But obviously there's also challenges, and one of them, as Christina mentioned initially, was or is that exchange of information between all these different stakeholders is extremely important. And as we know also from the challenges that the revised World Anti-Doping Code is facing with the European Union, the coming EU directive on data protection presents some challenges. The intentions obviously are very good to protect data, personal data, from being misused. But on the other hand, if we cannot exchange data within our systems, then it's hardly possible to do anything about problems like doping and match fixing. So it's very important that governments and organizations really work together with the EU to get a system, to get a directive, but also to get an interpretation of the directive that makes it possible to carry out this work. As it is, a study from the European Union has shown that the existing directive, which is of course in effect for all European Union member countries, is actually interpreted very, very differently from country to country. Some countries have national legislation or national practice that allows much more than in another EU country. So stability in the interpretation of the directive is just as important as the directive itself. In this context, it's also, from our perspective, very important that there is trust being built between those who have access to the data. I could mention again Mr. Ali, who represents ESA, which is one of the organizations who monitor the betting. taking place in all over the world actually. If organizations such as his do not trust who will be receiving information about maybe suspicion, betting patterns and so on, then this information will get stuck and it will not be possible for sports organizations and others to act upon this information. So there is a lot of work to be done to build up relations, to make cooperation agreements, memorandums of understanding, etc., etc., for the future work. And of course, another problem will be the funding. Mr. Pound described the challenges that we experience with the funding of the World Anti-Doping Agency and its work. Since we have a much more fragmented situation when it comes to the organization of the fight against match fixing, funding obviously is going to be a big challenge, and we will wait to see how the proper funding can be achieved, but at least we have to start somewhere, as some federations have done and as some sports organizations like the NOC of Denmark have done, and like we have done in Denmark with the national platform. We will wait and see how these national platforms that has to be in every country which adopts the European Convention against match fixing, how they will be formed, how they will work, and how they will be funded. We're very interested in taking part in that process. Also, we have heard just before that WADA is now studying, taking the responsibility for testing as the global center of competence in anti-doping. We also, that was a decision from the IOC just recently. We also learned that all Olympic Sports Federation have signed up to the IOC Managed Intelligence System on Illegal Betting, IBIS. And this could lead probably to some discussions about why not create, either create a world agency against match fixing, or probably even doing what we are doing in Denmark, meaning that WADA could be also a sports integrity agency for not only doping, but match fixing and probably other aspects as well. This surely could be an interesting idea to discuss for the future. Finally, avoiding conflicts of interest. In match fixing as well as in doping, obviously, for myself having worked more than 25 years in sports organization, I have to say, I hate to say that there could be theoretically conflicts of interest when you have sports organizations controlling yourself, controlling your athletes when it comes to doping, when it comes to match fixing. I had athletes coming back from the recent World Championships in wrestling, having discussed with a number of other athletes from other countries, particularly Russian-speaking countries, and they said that, well, our guys said that, well, Anti-Doping Denmark, they control us, they warn us if we don't live up to our whereabouts, and they sanction us if we do something wrong, and the other athletes, they couldn't believe what they were hearing. They said, but our anti-doping system, they are there to help us not getting caught. That's the way it worked in their countries. So conflicts of interest is obviously a challenge. Finally, and quick, I'll give myself the yellow card in order to be finishing. Not going through this in detail, we have been touching upon it already. Cooperation could be the keywords for the future in this regard. Between all stakeholders, we need to talk together, we need to work together, we need to discuss what can be done, we need to get the relevant legislation. A lot of these things are taking place, surveillance of bets, etc. But as I said, this information cannot get stuck. We need to get it to the right places in order to address these problems. And finally, what is needed also, address gambling culture among athletes, information and education, just like in the anti-doping, another field where it's the situation is exactly the same. We have to reach out to the children, to the young people, to address the problem before it really starts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jesper and Christina, for this very interesting presentation on how to utilize some of the experience we have already from the anti-doping work and maybe combat the problem of match fixing in an intelligent way. I know we're running out of time, and I know I'm the only one standing between you and lunch, but I'm quite sure that these presentations was of great interest for all of you, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. So I think we can maybe push the limit a little bit and have like 15 minutes of questions and answers, so we will be a little late for lunch, but I hope that's okay with you. So please, there must be a lot of questions. Nobody dare to raise their hand? Yeah, there's a gentleman down there. And please state your name and where you're from, and if you have a direct question to one of the panelists, please direct the question directly to that person.
My name is Mogens Kirkeby. I have a question for all of you, because most of the topics at Play the Game, we seem to be in between doing nothing and solving it. I think we agree that we cannot do nothing, so we do a little bit. We also agree on doping, match fixing, corruption, that it cannot be solved. But my question is for you as operational organizations, how you deal with such weak goals between doing a little but never solving it? Do you have more specific goals in your internal work?
More specific goals? Who want to take up that?
Well, yes. I think you have to understand that the way you eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And you're not going to go from zero to a complete solution overnight. You've got to develop consensus in 200 countries, varying levels of commitment and so forth. So you do little things at the start and you make it incremental. I was saying in my remarks where we have not maximized what I think we could do is we've done a lot of the teaching and educating. We haven't said, now look, it's been 15 years and you haven't got yourself code compliant. I mean, even if you move your lips when you read, you should be able to do this in 15 years. So you're non-code compliant. You're clearly not taking this issue seriously. So until you get that done, you're not going to participate in international sport. That's the next step for me. I think you need the carrot and you need the stick.
Yes, I agree, as almost always with Mr. Pound. In one of my slides it said after barking comes biting, and I think it is time to bite in a certain number of cases towards organizations or countries who are not compliant. At the same time, at the coal phase, as we tend to say, we do see what we do, and do we have specific goals? Most certainly. I want every single athlete in the Netherlands to know about why doping is not part of the sport system as we want to see it. And we measure it every 4 years. It's not only about catching the cheats. It's most certainly also about prevention and what we try to do to clean up sport in a more positive way, which is a hard word to say. And am I ever not going to my job with a good heart? No, most of the times I'm in high spirits, and sometimes I think, yeah, what the fuck am I doing? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I can see my chairman has a question.
Yeah, my name is Mette Hartlev. I'm the chairperson of the board of the Danish Anti-Doping Agency, and thank you so much for 3 brilliant presentations. I think it was very interesting to hear your ideas about the future of anti-doping, of the anti-doping work, Herman, because I think you rightly pointed to the fact that we have the rules that we need. So how can we proceed? And you mentioned the need of have more data and research done so that we can work more smart, both in terms of prevention and also when we do the testing programs and monitor the test, and maybe also the procedure we use when we are testing. So how can we ensure that we have the right research in this area? I mean, coming from research institutions where we are now facing severe cut downs, and knowing that doping research is not high on the research agenda of our governments. What can we actually do to promote the important research in that area? And here I'm not only talking about what we call the wet research, I mean the scientific research, but also about the social science research, which can give us very important information about how the athlete feels, what is the deterrent factor, where do we find the right cheater profile, what is the cheater profile, and what is those who by accident ends up in a doping case. So what would be your suggestion?
I wouldn't dare
and other
to,
suggestions as well.
I wouldn't dare to say it on a global level because I really can't see all the facts that are relevant. I can say something about how we try to do it in the Netherlands, and basically that is playing on as much chessboards as you can find. So for instance, a number of universities in the Netherlands are interested in these kind of topics. So I engage with them vis-a-vis to get them interested, and at some point in time things start happening. And funding, of course, is very important, but it always starts with an idea, with interest, with wanting to do something. At the same time, for instance, there are European funds to do research. Of course, you have to invest a whole lot in terms of time and rather boresome work to get one single project going. But once you got it going, it really has impact. On the level of water, for instance, I think that there is a separate fund for social science research. I think that could be bigger, and actually I think at the same time maybe we have to get some money out of the exact science kind of research, because there is a disbalance, I think, between the two, and we may be able to move forward much better when we know more about the social and the psychological side than we know about what actually goes on in the laboratories.
Thank you very much. And I think Ask, I'm not the only one called Ask in this room. There's another one down there, please.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Michael Ask. My name is Ask Christiansen from University of Aarhus. I was interested in hearing that most of you said that now we are in a situation where we no longer want to just go for the individual athlete, but we want to approach the kingpins behind or the organizations behind the athletes, whether it being doping or match fixing. But at the same time, there seems to be still going a lot of scapegoating on and taking individual athletes out and at least implying that by doing that we solve the problem. And now, since Lance Armstrong has been mentioned a number of times, there is currently a case in the U.S. Raised by U.S. Postal, the former sponsor of his team, saying that they knew nothing about doping, and now that when Armstrong went on Oprah and told that he was doping, they want their money back. Even if they were present in the Tour de France in '98 and they've been following up on their investment and seen that they've had a huge return on investment, now they want still to scapegoat. If we are serious about going having some kind of chain responsibility and going for the kingpins, wouldn't it be more fair actually to turn that situation around and go after U.S. Postal? Instead of going after Armstrong, since U.S. Postal perfectly knew what was going on when they were in that sponsorship.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not sure the panel can answer the concrete question, but in an overall term, it's an interesting question, the relationship between the individual offender, you can call it, and the kingpins or the organizers behind. I don't know who in the panel will take that.
I think, I don't know whether U.S. Postal Service as a corporation knew that it was being defrauded. I think a lot of, it was probably caught up in some of the Armstrong, the euphoria that prevailed at that time. But it's not USPS that's trying to get the money back. It's a combination of the whistleblower plus the U.S. government on the basis that the USPS was defrauded. And they have a treble damages provision in the particular statute that allows, if it was a $30 million sponsorship, they can recover 90 plus presumably interest and costs. So it's a significant weapon, and it's a significant recognition of the importance of whistleblowing, because the whistleblower will share in whatever is recovered, even if it happens to be Floyd Landis, who was part of the team. But it's pretty clear that Armstrong personally was involved in making sure in enforcing the fact that his entire team doped in order to make sure that he was the one that won the Tour de France. So I don't think it's all scapegoating. I think you're looking at one of the kingpins. Where we're not very good at doing that is individual athletes out there that are caught and test positive. But there's a difficulty in getting evidence that would allow you to sanction the sports officials and coaches. And that's just a matter of evidence. And that's just not available.
May I add, indeed, that we have a big problem, and we feel that we have a big problem in finding this kind of evidence. The revised code is slightly moving towards athlete support personnel as a really relevant group to look at, but still our rules are basically aimed at the individual athlete. And when we want to go a step further, which we always do, we encounter at least 3 problems. One of them being that all this kind of information is not available to us. Sometimes it's kept away from us by government because it cannot be shared. For instance, information about doctors is so much privileged that I can do a lot, but I won't get there. Secondly, the athletes don't speak up. We recently did research, and almost, I think it was like 94-95% said they would never speak up about things they see in their direct environment. And the third thing, of course, is dependence. One of the reasons why athletes don't speak up is when they're still in the system. They're not away from whoever is in their neighborhood who might be a problem. And later on, it's not relevant anymore. But we feel it every day. And it's one of, if I get frustrated, to go back to that question, it's about this. It's not about catching not enough athletes or something like that. It's about this.
And could I also add that, to no surprise probably, this shows also the importance of resources being allocated to national anti-doping organizations and to WADA, because on the national level we can work with law enforcement, as we already do with police, trying to catch those behind. And WADA can work with, for instance, pharmaceutical industry and Interpol, etc. Whereas international sports federations have less possibility to work with police. There has been some cases, but it's probably not their main job to do that. So as it said, we cannot avoid having regulations covering the prohibition of doping for the users, but we can do and are doing more when it comes to catching those behind.
So one more, probably final question down there. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Peter Nicholson. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Danish authorities for deciding that match fixing and doping are 2 sides of pretty much the same coin. And also for another reason, is because you're obliged to find a new name for an entity that has to deal with both, and you've decided on a name which has the word integrity in it. I'm for my sins, a part-time ethics officer at the International Cricket Council, and ethics, integrity, morality are important words to consider to layer over the top of mere rules and regulations in sport. But now that you've focused on this word integrity, I want to ask you whether you would consider creating measures and mechanisms for rewarding athletes that demonstrate integrity in the sport, because we talk a lot about punishing those that don't, but those that try their hardest to maintain an integrity without doping, without cheating, seem to get short shrift, and they're left on their own only to decide at their own ethical or moral level whether they do or don't cheat. So are you thinking of introducing measures that would reward integrity for athletes that don't cheat?
Christina, something for you to answer? Or Jesper?
Yeah. We heard yesterday Michael Ask say that if you win clean, then say it. And I think that is an important message to athletes, that don't be shy to say that I won clean if obviously he or she did win clean. And when it comes to prizes or measures, we have there are, for instance, within the Ministry of Culture, every year prizes giving out to people who have made great achievements, and we as an anti-doping organization can promote persons or organizations who have done a lot in this respect to win this prize, and some of them have done it. I don't know if you have other ideas and suggestions. We would love to hear them, but we think it's important as well. Peter, thank you.
Christina?
One thing that occurs to me is the spin doctors who get after whistleblowers have turned whistleblower into a bad word instead of a good one. And so one of the collective tasks we should think about is, all right, let's coin a new term, at least as it relates to sport, which perhaps is built around integrity. As far as your observation is concerned, my experience is that the ones that are the dirtiest and who win are the ones that proclaim that they're the cleanest. And so you've got to be really careful about that. I mean, they can lie to you.
I mean, you could perhaps, athletes that publish their blood values from day one, everything, you know, they may or may not win, but they're certainly demonstrating a level of integrity that others, particularly those who've been accused of being suspicious of late, you know, have refused to do. So those types of gesture are probably merit-worthy in my understanding. Yeah. And how you reward it is another thing. But those types of gesture, I feel, and you know, you don't know when there's a cumulative effect takes place and others decide to get on the same integrity bandwagon, even if it's a cynical act. But you need to sort of move that ball forward.
And it's a good point. Yeah, sorry.
If you do that at a certain point, and it becomes the norm, and athlete X does not do that, you know, you've got a beep, beep, beep warning signal. So.
But allow me just as also CEO of Anti-Doping Denmark to actually add, I think it's a good point, Peter, and we are actually right now working on a strategy, and I don't have the answer exactly to your question, but we're actually talking about trying to turn the whole interpretation of what is an anti-doping agency. Instead of always dwelling with the bad guys, we also try to maybe in the future to make some good examples, to actually find some athletes who we think, I mean, you can never be totally sure, but we think they are clean, and actually use them actively in a positive way as good examples for the other young athletes normally. So that's something we're working on right now, and how it will come out, I don't know exactly yet, but that's part of our strategy probably in the coming years. So we went 15 minutes past time. I'm sorry for that, but I hope, and I think personally this was a very interesting session, and I hope you got something valuable out of it, and I think it's time for lunch now. Thank you very much.